Hello everyone, welcome to the Parkscope Unprofessional Podcast Hour. My name is Joe. I am checking my audio levels right now to make sure I'm recording myself. I am. That's good. Because joining me is technically the third time guest of the show. Actually, the second time you guys are going to hear him. Because he's part of the long-lost episode. We have two of those, or three of those, I think. Anyway, joining us is Dave Dowd. How are you doing?
Hello. I'm doing pretty well. How about you, Joe?
I'm, just anxiety, a ball of anxiety. That's all I am now.
Well, yeah, I've got some of that too.
It's just constantly, student
Seems
loans.
to be going around lately.
Yeah, student loans, money worries, nuclear proliferation. Yeah, whatever.
All the good stuff.
Yeah, all the good stuff. But we're not here to talk about those fun topics. We're here to talk about theme parks. Yay!
Yay!
So the first time David was on the show was we talked about the future of studio parks, and this was maybe about, I think, right around Diagon Alley opening or right before that. So it's been a few years, and then we were going to do this again in February, and then I just butchered everything up with the recording. So now we have more news from Hollywood Studios, and we also have the Star Wars Hotel and the role-playing in the parks and all sorts of stuff. So we think now is a good time to go back to this topic. So let's start off with the future of studio parks. Do you want to kind of kick this off, David?
Yeah, so it's interesting the way that this category of parks has developed over time. I saw somebody, I can't remember who, and I feel terrible, but somebody on Twitter was saying that studio parks have sort of morphed into something they were never necessarily intended to be, and that thing has kind of taken over and defined the entire theme park space, it seems like. Because when it first started out, it was literally what it says on the tin. It was a theme park that was also a functional movie studio, and the only one of those that still exists anymore really is Universal Studios Hollywood. And there was the whole experiment to try to make Orlando Hollywood East, and it just didn't pan out over time, and so these parks have been sort of left without their core identity and had to try to find a new core identity. And Universal has really led the charge in that regard with things like Wizarding World of Harry Potter, and in the future with Nintendo Land and stuff like that. It's become a place to have these massive, fully immersive recreations of movie or video game environments, rather than what it used to be, which was kind of this tongue-in-cheek vibe of it's a ride, but it's also a look behind the scenes, in addition to the actual behind-the-scenes stuff. Yeah.
When you're speaking of that, and I remember we discussed this, I forget if it was the Lost episode or the first episode, was how Star Tours is done in Hollywood Studios is everything the old Star Tours was you had the half sets outside. You'd walk into the building and then you'd see production chairs for C-3PO and R2-D2, and then you're fully in the environment as if it was a movie studio, and you just if you just looked around or a panel fell off, you would see the craft services table.
right, and you also had the weird. It's a ride. It's like I'm thinking of the Jaws ride at Universal Florida, where it was this bizarre thing of Jaws was a movie, but it also happened, and
it actually happened. Then the movie was filmed here, and now it's happening again, but in real life.
Right. And that seemed to be something that Universal, that was kind of their go-to thing, with Revenge of the Mummy. It's this is a set for the Mummy movie we're making, but it's also actually cursed.
Yeah. There was that. I think I don't remember Confrontation that well, but I think that was just walking right onto the set.
Yeah.
Like, there was no pretense about, hey, it actually existed or anything. I mean, E.T. still kind of somewhat has that, where it's like, nope, you're saving E.T., it's like the movie. But yeah, they kind of...
Rest in peace, Botanicus.
Yeah, I still think he's going to come back, but that's just me. I'm just hopeful, with my youthful optimism. Yeah, it's just a weird kind of thing, because, like, also with the Great Movie Ride, which we'll get to in a little bit, that's the one where you walk into a theater, and then you literally walk behind the scenes, and you're in a production area, and then you're like literally in the movies. Right.
They go through the whole, sound, lights, camera, action. The whole beginning of the ride is this elaborate, okay, we're starting the shoot on a movie and you're in it. And that was, less successfully accomplished a few decades later with Superstar Limo, but the less said about that, the better.
Yes. Actually, I'm a little disappointed I never got on that, because we went there like in August of that year. And
oh, baby, I managed to get in that 11 months it was open.
I mean, I'm not happy I wrote it. Like, I'm not like, oh man, I really missed a classic. But it's one of those things where you're like, I wonder what it would have been like if I saw the Astor computer review.
Right. It's such a bizarre theme park relic, because it's kind of got a mythology around it at this point. It was this ride that was so bad that they couldn't even keep it open for a full year, and it was better to just let the shell of it rot there for half a decade than keep it open.
My theme park claim to fame is I got to ride the Discover Island riverboats during the open year of Animal Kingdom. Back when people thought it was an actual ride and not just transportation to like the other side of Africa.
See, I never got in on that action.
Yeah, well, so you know the history of that ride, right? Did you?
Yeah.
Yeah, Jeff did an article on the site, actually, so I'd look that up. But man, that was a ride. That was also the park where the first ride we did was Dinosaur with my whole family, and we've never been on Indiana Jones Adventure at that point. So we all get off of it, and we're just like, whoa. Like, okay, we need to take a moment here. But yeah, so the studio park started off as, very much, this is literally what's happening here. We are just taking the sound stages and the green screens that we're using here and showing you how movies are made, to doing this faux kind of, this is where a movie's made, but it's real life, or that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. I also think there was a certain level of, I think later on, where this is actually like real. Like, this is an actual real production facility. Like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire Play It was a good example, where, hey, we film here and like this is actually it. Or they tried doing that with a few other things, but it just never worked that well. Mm-hmm. Because
well, I mean, that was kind of the pretense of the original Hollywood Studios, or at the time Disney MGM studio tour, was you were supposed to be able to walk through these sound stages while they were filming stuff, and be able to look down and see it actually happening. But that, the filmmakers did not appreciate that kind of audience. And so that quickly became, that got stripped away. And so even from the very beginning, this idea of what these parks were designed to be never quite worked.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting to see, like, Hollywood Studios, like, their first major edition, because I don't want to say Star Tours was an edition. I guess we can go with Muppets would be the first true edition. That was still trying to keep up the pretense a little bit, but not really. Like, they kind of threw that away already. Like, that was very much, they're on television, so it works in the park kind of thing.
It's, I mean, to an extent, it sort of still exists because it's baked into the entire premise of The Muppets. The Muppets is a show about showbiz. It's these, it's the sort of the Muppet Show is both the onstage vaudeville antics and the antics that go on behind the scenes as they try to put this vaudeville type show on. And so you have, so there's an element of behind the scenes-ness to the Muppets as a concept. And I think that definitely plays into Muppet Vision 3D, where it's, a backstage tour of the Muppet Labs. And even though it's experiments in film. And so it's a, behind the scenes tour of this weird Muppety film they're making.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I could see that a little bit more. I'm just kind of thinking from like a pure, but yeah, I could see definitely how that applies. And then I probably and where my brain was coming from was hey, this is not a real film studio, and also on the same end of things, they're not trying to do any walking into that world. That it's kind of like it exists as its own self there.
Yeah.
There's no kind of barrier. But like the actual expansions that they did for Sunset and Tower of Terror go into the front of the park, which then immediately becomes the more traditional Disney theme park.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is definitely interesting. Even though they do kind of break the fourth wall with the pre-show for Tower of Terror, and maybe the ride itself too. There's that. There's also the Maroon Studios editions that were rumored and planned but never came. Thanks, Paris. And those were more along the lines of, hey, this is a real live studio, and you guys are in like this cartoon studio, almost like Mickey's Toontown, but it's a studio. And it's more Roger Rabbit heavy, or the same Roger Rabbit heavy.
Yeah. Well, it's like the entire original aesthetic of these studio parks was to have you reminded at all times. You were acutely aware at all times that you were in a theme park. There was no pretense of transporting you to a different place or time. We're in a movie studio theme park, and this is the setting for this adventure. Like going back to what we were talking about with Jaws or Revenge of the Mummy, or the original Hollywood Studios stuff. And it's interesting now that as the studio parks move away from that idea and get into the idea of transporting you to a fully immersive environment, it's the Marvel stuff that's cropping up in the other parks that's kind of carrying that banner of what the original studio parks did, which is, no, this is a thing that's happening in a theme park. You've got the Iron Man experience, which is set in Hong Kong Disneyland, in Tomorrowland. That's the literal setting of the ride. And then the same rings true for Guardians of the Galaxy. It's kaboom right there at the end of Sunset Boulevard in Disney California Adventure, and you get up to the top of the elevator shaft, and Rocket comments on the fact that you are in Disneyland. And it's and with what they're teasing for the Guardians of the Galaxy stuff in Epcot, it kind of seems like that's the way they're going to continue to go with this. It's these Marvel characters are having an adventure in a theme park.
Mm-hmm. That's and that I'm not too cool about.
No, it's
that one.
No, because it's we can argue all day about whether that approach worked or didn't work in the context of a studio park, but I think it very clearly does not work in the context of these other parks that are more specifically trying to be transportive. We can Epcot less so. Epcot's not really interested in transporting you places so much as it is educating you, but it's still not the right tone for it's a completely different tone from what Epcot is trying to do, or what it ideally should be trying to do.
Yeah, definitely, and we can get into that a little bit later. So one of the things you touched on that I thought was interesting is when you're talking about the Marvel editions at California Adventure this summer, for the Summer of Heroes, no Marvel, can't do any Marvel stuff, so Summer of Heroes. one of the interesting things is that reminded me a lot of the original Disney MGM Studios kind of things they would do there. They would have parades, they would have meet and greets, they would do a lot of these temporary overlays of the park to highlight whatever new television or movies out. I remember.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there was like the Aladdin one where there's Aladdin. There was, I think, maybe Lion King. There was one for the television show Dinosaurs, because why not?
Yeah.
All that kind of stuff. There was. It just reminds me of that a lot, where it just seems like this whole entire idea of promotion, because it's like, hey, we're in the studio, so they're going to come out of the trailers and they're doing a parade now for you. That kind of thing is kind of echoing again, I would say.
Yeah, it definitely has that vibe to it, where I think it was, at least in my opinion, I think that kind of stuff was more permissible in the past for a couple of reasons. I think, number one, it was more punctual. These things actually coincided with the release of the movies or the movies or TV shows that they were promoting, instead of like, oh, let's bring out a Captain America meet and greet and a Thor meet and greet, and have Black Widow and Hawkeye palling around. And, the last time they've all been in a movie together was over a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
It's so, that's part of it, where it feels like kind of too little too late. But the other aspect of it, I think, is in California Adventure specifically, they've gone through such a process of trying to create a cohesive theme that does transport you in that park, to have this sort of unified aesthetic of early to mid 20th century California, and to have all this Marvel stuff, this contemporary present day Marvel stuff spackled over the top of it. It feels like a really frustrating step backwards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's get into a little bit more of the D23 presentation and kind of the changes that are being made to Hollywood Studios and the California Adventure, so we can kind of highlight, how these things are changing now. So the first big addition is Hollywood Studios is going to get Toy Story Land, which I remember when they were pimping that one up as just like Cars Land, going to be as big as Cars Land, and everything got cut from it. So,
right, and that was the year when Bob Iger stepped all over Bob Chapek's announcement and announced Star Wars Land at the live action movie panel, and they didn't have anything to build towards in the parks panel.
Yeah, that was awkward. Was Chapek there for that, or was that still Staggs?
It was Chapek.
Chapek? Really? Okay.
I think he was just barely in the door at that point.
Okay, weird. Can't believe it was 2 years ago then. Wow. Yeah. So that was the first thing. So that's, and then also again, Star Wars Land's coming, which we'll get into more in a second. What's interesting is that, it appears, is they've gone more towards the Diagon Alley approach, which is very much, you have an archway of some sort, or some sort of portal, from a general kind of, so you have a park that feels like a movie studio, in a way, and then a portal, or like, it kind of transports you into a mini Disneyland, almost like how the train tracks transport you at Disneyland.
Yeah.
And quite literally, the train tracks will transport you to Star Wars Land in Disneyland also. But same thing going with these lands now is, in Diagon Alley, you walk through the brick wall, using quotes there. Star Wars Land's going to have archways. Toy Story Land seems to have something going on there. And Super Nintendo World's going to have something too. So it's going to be interesting. It's not going to be interesting. It is interesting that this is kind of the way they're approaching it, is sort of an across the train tracks, a suburbs kind of feel for these parks, where everything is kind of segregated and very compartmentalized. So you feel like you can stay in somewhere for 2 to 3 hours and then move to the next one.
Yeah. Each is like its own separate pod, instead of being, a cohesive whole that each part contributes to the other.
Yeah. And that's what I find interesting, is that this is kind of the way they're moving to, is that it's no longer the movie studio with the attractions trying to tie into it. It's literally a hard cutoff, and it's just the movie studio is kind of just setting you up for going to movie locations.
Yeah, it is interesting, and but even beyond that, it's especially with Hollywood studios, it feels like the pretense of even being a movie studio is going to be gone once all this stuff opens up, because they're tearing out virtually all of the original studio infrastructure. I mean, there will be some left in the animation courtyard, but outside of that, you'll have the kind of Hollywood that never was but always will be for the front half of the park, and then the back half of the park will be literally just Star Wars Land and Toy Story Land.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also there's still the little area where 50s Prime Time and Star Tours and and Indiana Jones Stunt Spectacular and whatever they're going to do with that building, that Frozen show is still there, by the way. I don't know if you knew that.
I did not know that, but that makes a certain amount of sense. Hey, at least it's not another perpetual movie preview.
Yeah, at least it's not, yeah. But that whole area still has some of that vibe, but it's still really weird. And let's not forget, there was an American Idol experience at Hollywood Studios for a hot second.
Yeah.
That was so bizarre. And then now ABC has American Idol. Go figure.
Yeah. They're bringing it back.
So weird.
Right after they take it out of the parks, they're bringing it back.
Yeah. What was recently that was removed that was just coming back, but Disney removed it or Universal removed it?
Oh, God.
Forget what it was. It was something. I'll probably remember in a little bit. But it was like something that was like somewhat coming back or ironically coming back in some way, but it was so old, people laughed at it for a while, so when they finally replaced it, it was coming back around. I forget what it was. I'll remember it in a little bit or something like that.
The tragic thing, if we're going back a little bit, is that that's sort of the story of Back to the Future. It's not like right as the movie was starting to achieve something of a renaissance in popularity. That seems right around the time that Universal pulled the attraction from at least the domestic parks and replaced it with The Simpsons. Yeah,
and that's a whole weird thing with The Simpsons. But Back to the Future, the original attraction, is also interesting because that was one of the attractions, like Men in Black, which we can get to in a little bit also, that never kind of pretended it was anything but what it was.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It was very much... It felt like that area of Universal Studios Florida was very much this is it. But it was very loosely contained in a way. So it was still like the World Expo area, but you were at Men in Black, but you weren't like in Men in Black. Like you say you're in Diagon Alley, not at Diagon Alley.
Yeah.
But you're at Men in Black, not in Men in Black. Kind of like how, kind of also like how you said beforehand, oh, I'm at Simpsons right now, but now you say, oh, I'm in Springfield, or something like that. Kind of like how they're just expanding that a little bit more. So it's interesting to see how that kind of developed. And it seems like that early 2000s period is where a lot of that stuff started to switch. With Men in Black, I felt was a good example of them really kind of getting rid of the pretend, like, hey, this is a movie studio. Terminator 2 is a good example too. A bunch of those kinds of things. But anyway, that is interesting. Any other thoughts for the future studio parks? Or do you want to head over to Star Wars?
Well, I think just kind of to sum it up, it's interesting to see this progression of these parks did have a cohesive theme and a cohesive idea to them, but then that idea was kind of taken away from them against their will for the most part. Disney and Universal did not choose so much to move away from this is a studio idea as much as it was a case where oh, we can't afford to run studios here anymore, so it's just a theme park now. We should probably get rid of these sad shells of buildings that aren't doing anything anymore. But it's this change that sort of happened out of necessity of, well, if we can't have an actual functioning studio here, let's build these fully immersive recreations of popular movies. That has gone on to become the new defining trait of every park. It seems like you know, where even Disneyland, the original, which has a very specific, coherent idea to it, is having this thing that is wholly in contrast with that original idea, kind of tacked on to the back of it. And I think, I'm excited for Star Wars Land. I'm excited to see it. And I think walling it off from the rest of the park is the best way to address the fact that this is a square peg being shoved into a round hole. Is just kind of like, don't look behind the curtain. This is a completely different thing. But it doesn't negate the fact that they are two completely different things that are being sort of stitched together.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. So Star Wars. One of the things that you first DM'd me about was I need to talk about the Star Wars Hotel.
Yeah.
What do you want to talk about with the Star Wars Hotel? I mean, there's plenty of things we can still talk about.
Yeah, so the Star Wars Hotel is interesting, and I think the reason I've had an itch to talk about it is I think a lot of theme park people are looking at it from through a traditional theme park lens, which makes sense. You go to a hotel and you're there at night to sleep, and then you spend most of your time in the parks. You might come back and go to the pool or go to one of the restaurants or something, but you're not spending a lot of time in the hotel. It's it's there to meet the needs of being a human being, but when you're going to Disneyland or Walt Disney World or Universal Studios, you're there for the parks, and you want to spend as much time in the parks as possible.
Yeah, the traditional, I could pay to stay anywhere else, but I'm going to go to All Stars because all I need is a bed and a shower, and some place to poop.
Right. I think what's different about the Star Wars Hotel, at least the way they're pitching it, or at least the way it sounds like they're pitching it, and the way I think not a lot of theme park people are totally getting at this point, is the Star Wars Hotel is not there for you to sleep at in between sessions in the parks. It's there as an attraction unto itself. This is the stupidest, most cliche thing, because, I mean, Disneyland or Walt Disney World said it about Animal Kingdom After Dark, but you can almost think of it as a fifth gate for Walt Disney World. It's obviously not as vast as a traditional theme park, but it's an experience unto itself, and I think the intention is for you to it's an add-on to a Disney vacation, not the place, not your base camp for an entire trip. So say if a family is taking a 5-day trip down there, instead of maybe instead of spending maybe they'll spend 3 days in the parks, and they'll do a 2-night stay at the Star Wars Hotel, and they'll have a cheaper hotel the rest of the time. I think that's the way I envision this, and I think that's the way that Disney really needs to sell it. Is because and I think looking at the pricing, I think that's what makes the most sense, and I think that's what they're thinking of, because it's not priced like a hotel, it's priced like a cruise. If you compare the prices between the rumor for the Star Wars Hotel was I think it was $600 a night for the first adult and $200 for each additional, something
like that. Yeah.
And so minimum of 2 nights, and so that's $2,400 for 2 nights, and the lowest cost room on a Disney cruise is about $2,100 for a 2-night. So
Mm-hmm.
we're in the same ballpark there, and so it'll be interesting to watch as more details trickle out about this, because I think the only way to make it work is if that $2,400 is an all-in price. So you're talking not only a place to sleep, but that covers your food during the stay. That covers whatever gewgaws they give you, costumes, props, whatever else,
Mm-hmm.
and potentially even admission to the park, or at least Galaxy's Edge. Who knows if they would cordon that off for people who are staying at the hotel, if they can only access Galaxy's Edge, or if they have access to the entire park. Who knows?
Mm-hmm.
But I think the only way that price makes sense is if you're looking at it as as the cruise line model. You pay one price, and then for the duration of your stay, everything's paid for. You don't have to pull out your wallet again because it's already covered.
Mm-hmm. I think another good example is Disney's looking at some of the kind of the fixed. I don't want to say fixed, but sort of the. I'm thinking when Disney's saying this stuff, I'm thinking of stuff like escape rooms, or
Absolutely.
or weekends, or medieval time weekends when people go and they camp out. And they go full regalia and stuff. I'm thinking of things like that where it's very much a steeper buy-in. They have something, but it's a complete experience from point A, from the start to the end. No matter no matter if it's a half-hour escape room, hour escape room, or 2 days in the Star Wars hotel. And
sorry, go ahead.
And one of the things I was thinking of when we're saying this is, I think they sold it wrong, as in they said, calling it the Star Wars Hotel, because when you do that, they then close the part of the presentation with that Marvel Hotel in Paris, which are two completely different things. So I think when people are saying a Star Wars Hotel, people are thinking, oh, okay, I'm going to go there, there's going to be some Star Wars stuff, and then I'm going to go to the parks. When they probably should have changed that name, or called it like the Star Wars Resort. Like, even the resort sounds too hotel-y. Like, create a new definition or some sort of idea behind it, because it just, calling it a hotel, I think, does it a disservice.
Or, I mean, the thing... the name Jim Hill was banging the drum on about what eventually turned out to be Galaxy's Edge, maybe just call it the Star Wars experience. That harkens back to the Star Trek experience in Vegas. Again, rest in peace. But it's something different from what you traditionally think of as a hotel, and it's comparable to, like you said, escape rooms, or like weekend excursions. I know it's especially with Harry Potter, a lot of these are all unlicensed, of course, but a lot of fans will organize these events where they rent out a space for a weekend, and it's it's an all-inclusive buy-in. So you're talking meals are provided, lodging is provided, their activities are provided for the entire weekend, and it's this fully immersive thing. Another example is, I'm not sure if any of your listeners have heard about this, but there's a film festival every year in the hotel that inspired the Overlook Hotel from Stephen King's The Shining.
I didn't know about that. That's cool.
And so it's a film festival, but there's also an alternate reality game that goes in tandem with the film festival through the entire weekend. And so it's you've got deranged people knocking on your door at 2 a.m. with cryptic notes to give you, and seances in the basement and stuff like that. Obviously, I don't think Disney's going to go in for the seances in the Star Wars hotel, but it kind of gives you an idea of what this might be, where we're talking 24/7 a 24/7 interactive experience, a game that plays out over the course of however long your stay is. And I also think that they've said a minimum of 2 days, but I think there'll also likely be a cap on the experience. I don't think this is a hotel that you can stay at indefinitely. I think it'll probably max out at 4 or 5 days if you're willing to pony up for that much. But for each whatever length of time you choose to stay between 2 and 5 days, there will be an experience tailored to that amount of time. So the 2-day experience might be different from the 3-day experience, from the 4-day experience. There will be different things potentially that you do so that you're entertained throughout that entire time.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it may be just a 2-day experience.
That's possible too. I think it was on Telegraph. I was looking up some articles before we started recording, and I think they were basing this on the initial survey that went out, and who knows how much of that is still in the cards. But they were saying that it would be a 2-day experience, period.
Yeah, because when you're then saying, oh, it could be 4 or 5 days, then you're running into this thing of people walking in halfway or having rooms just flat out empty because it's a minimum of 2 days. And if you have 4 days and you want to stay 3 days, well, there's a day empty a room.
Yeah.
And also, like, you got to do, like, I'm imagining when you stay at this hotel, there's probably a 48-hour plan, kind of where they execute a 48-hour story. I remember there was also, I was listening to a podcast, I forget which podcast it was. I think it was actually the Giant Bombcast. They were talking about it's like dinner theater, I think it's in San Francisco, where it's dinner. Actually, no, I think it was a different podcast. Anyway, besides the point right now. It's a 4-hour event, like dinner, you get everything, but there are actors walking around. And there are general rules in how to approach the actors and deal with the actors. Like, you cannot, like, if an actor approaches you, you can interact with them. And there's all these multiple storylines going around, but you're not allowed to interrupt them with like if they're doing something with another actor, which pushes the story along, you're not supposed to, like, intrude on that or, like, jump in the middle, you know, kind of thing, you know, like, you know, like, you'll probably be asked to leave or something at that point. But it's a very much a 360 kind of theater experience.
Yeah, that sounds a lot like Sleep No More in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an incredible thing, by the way. If any of your listeners are in or around New York, it's well worth the $100 admission. Let me tell you guys that. Is
it very similar to that, or is it crazier or scarier or?
So Sleep No More, it's basically, the pretense of it is it's a retelling of Macbeth, Shakespeare's Macbeth, but it's all done. It's not scary so much, but it has kind of an eerie vibe to it. It's got kind of like it feels very similar in just aesthetic and tone to the first 2 BioShock games. And so you're walking through this space. It's like a 5-story building that they have rented out in Manhattan, and it's this 5-story space that you're in for. The entire experience lasts for something like 3 or 4 hours, but you can come in at any point. But anyway, you enter the space and you are free to roam around, and you're given a mask to wear, and you're instructed not to take off the mask, not to talk during the experience, and not to interrupt any of the performers unless, again, like you said, they kind of reach out to you and start to interact with you specifically. They can approach you, but you can't approach them, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So you're given free reign to explore the space, and there's like a dozen or so different members of the main cast, and then maybe another dozen kind of tertiary players scattered throughout the space, and you just kind of wander from room to room and see the story play out from different perspectives. And it ends up, if you stay the entire length of the time, it loops like 2 or 3 different times, so you can kind of follow the same story from different perspectives if you'd like. But it's a really, really neat thing. And I could definitely see aspects of that informing the experience of the Star Wars Hotel, where you are set loose in this space, and there are maybe specific things that you are scheduled to do at certain times, or specific tasks you're given, but outside of that, you're free to explore the entire space and visit the different rooms and chambers on the starship and interact with the different characters. I think, and that's what's smart about the way that Knott's has handled the Ghost Town Alive game they've been doing the past couple of years, is they have these set events that happen at different times throughout the day, so it kind of gives you a reason to be in a specific place at a specific time. But outside of those set events, it's up to you how much or how little you want to engage with it. Okay.
And I think that's kind of what the Star Wars experience, let's call it the Star Wars experience, because maybe Jim Hill got the name wrong. That's what the hotel is going to be called. I don't know. Maybe he was right all along, but the Star Wars experience sounds like this. So I was just on Wikipedia quick looking it up. It's a 3-hour event with a 1-hour loop. So so everything replays 3 times throughout this 3-hour event.
Right. And I don't think that would be how they would handle it necessarily with the Star Wars thing. I think if you're signing up for a 2-day experience, I think it'll be I think it will propel you forward throughout the entire 2 days, so there will be a story that takes place over the entire time, with different events happening at different times, but obviously there's going to be a certain amount of downtime. They can't, no matter how much they staff this and how much they plan it, it's logistically impossible to keep everybody entertained for 24 hours a day with predetermined activities, and I don't think people would want that necessarily. I think you have to give people a chance to breathe and kind of take things at their own pace. So I think there will be, opportunity to explore and interact with the characters and sort of flesh out this world on your own terms outside of the specific scripted events, similar to what Knott's is doing with Ghost Town Alive and what Disney experimented with in Legends of Frontierland.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, do you want to kind of go into that a little bit with your experiences?
Yeah, one more point.
Oh, okay.
On the
sorry.
One more point on the Star Wars thing I just wanted to mention real quick is I'm not at liberty to discuss who it is, but I'm familiar with one of the designers working on the Star Wars Hotel, the Star Wars Experience, whatever you want to call it. And I know that one of this person's core design tenets is that in order to create a memorable experience, you have to give people access to things that they feel like they shouldn't have access to.
Okay.
And so I could see... So the idea of that opens up a lot of interesting possibilities. I mean, if theme park admission is included into the thing here, perhaps instead of the traditional idea of extra magic hours, maybe you're led into the park at some point during the time it's closed, and you're given an assignment to, I don't know, retrieve a strong box from the cantina, or to find some intel somewhere in Star Wars Land after hours when there's not all the guests there. And so it kind of feels like you're, on a secret assignment for the Resistance, trying to find this information in a place where you're not supposed to be. I think that could create a really compelling layer to this whole experience if they, allow you access to the park after hours, foregoing kind of the traditional idea of extra magic hours, but having a more structured experience instead.
I think, and that also brought me into this for Sleep No More and everything is, maybe there's only, like, the main tenet of the Star Wars Experience / hotel or whatever is that it's a spaceship. So what I'm thinking is, what happens if you dock at certain hours to Star Wars Land, and then you also pick up, you also have a pickup and transport for characters at certain times.
Yeah.
Example being like, hey, we have characters come in at 9 and they leave at 11, and then we'll have characters on at 1 and 3, and then, 7 and 9, or something like that, where you cycle through characters and storylines. You don't have actors doing this thing for 48 hours straight.
Yeah.
And also you can give these guests, time to breathe, move around, if they're not comfortable with something, they can go back to their rooms. And that also then plays into another thought I have is what happens if there's multiple levels of experience you want? This is another thing I heard on a podcast. This one I'm very sure I did hear on the Giant Bombcast was the idea of a horror experience where you camp in the woods. And there's
I've heard about those.
Yeah, there's 5 levels that you pick from. Level number 1 is basically you're there for stories and then you go to bed and nothing happens. Number 2 is that, there's you can hear some things outside and that's about it. Number 3 is they can come into your camp. Number 4 is they can interact with the tent. And number 5 is they can basically chase you around the woods as much as they want.
Yeah,
so,
and I could definitely see stuff like that being an opt-in thing as well. It would have to be, obviously, opt-in. But, the idea of if you're game for it, some kind of, you're in your jammies, sleeping in your bed, and all of a sudden there's a red alert siren in your room, and you've got some kind of thing you have to do. I mean, again, going back to the Stanley Film Festival I mentioned, that's and obviously that's more horror oriented. So who knows how game Disney's going to be for disturbing people's sleep, but that's disturbing people's sleep is definitely an aspect of that one, and so I can see that being a potential option for people who are willing to go that far with it.
Yeah, and I'm also wondering if there's going to be if there may be downtime, just permanent downtime. We're not going to do anything at these hours.
Yeah, possibly. I could see that as well. And you mentioned the characters, and this is something I'm not sure is widely known outside of the people who've participated in these games, but I think one of the smartest things that both Disney and Knott's has done with their respective cowboy games is the cast for specific characters is fixed. So if you show up on Tuesday, the guy playing if you show up on Tuesday and then come back on Thursday, the guy playing Tiny Mayfield is going to be the same guy. It's not 4 different people playing Tiny Mayfield. There's one actor assigned to one role, and they can swap out different actors to fill similar functions within the story, but it's a different character. So maybe on one day at Ghost Town Alive you have Tiny Mayfield running for sheriff, and on the next day you have Billy Mayfield running for sheriff. So there's different ways that the story can still persist with different characters, but you never have this you never have that experience that kind of takes you out of it of, the person I was talking to before, this is supposedly the same person, but they're clearly not.
Okay, what would it be? So the characters aren't fixed to an actor, as an example. It would be more along the lines of the characters kind of ebb and flow a little bit more.
Sort of.
Okay.
So an actor is assigned. So one actor plays one role. So you don't have people doubling up on the same role. But in order to keep the story moving along, different characters can serve different purposes. So, for instance, in the Star Wars context, maybe you have Admiral Akbar. You probably won't actually have Admiral Akbar. say you
an Akbar-like,
right? Or say so you have you go to the command center and Admiral Akbar's there, and he's interacting with you and he's helping you out with stuff. But then later on, when the actor playing Admiral Akbar has to go on their break or has to go home for the day, there's another character that fills that role on the command center. Maybe he's first mate. Maybe he's something else. But it's not a different actor playing Admiral Akbar. It's a completely different character who stepped up to fill that function in the story. But it's so now you're talking to I don't know. Maybe you're talking to
a whole new character, just a brand new made up one,
right? Or Poe Dameron or something. It's so the story can still keep moving when the actors are swapped out, but you don't have the experience of, oh, you're not the person I was talking to. You're not the same actor I was talking to before.
Mm-hmm. So if you need to smuggle something, it's from this one character in this one area during this time frame, but not always the same character. But it's a similar style of character, maybe similar theme of a character. I would say maybe.
Maybe one day you get Han Solo, maybe the other day you get Lando Calrissian, but it's always going to be Harrison Ford playing Han Solo, and it's always going to be Billy Williams playing Lando Calrissian.
Of course,
obviously,
I mean always.
Obviously, that's a completely unrealistic scenario, but I think I say that to kind of drive the point home. You're not going to get Chris Pratt playing Han Solo one day and Harrison Ford playing him another day. It's always going to be Harrison Ford.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay. Yeah, okay, I can see that. And I think that works well because if you have like blocks of story time, and then that story time can be over like lunch or breakfast, or it could be totally separate from the event. It could be in all sorts of different areas of the hotel. And I also imagine they'll probably have fixed meal times and stuff like that, where similar to a cruise, you have,
like X number of people have dinner at 5:00 and X number of people have dinner at 6:00 kind of thing. Yeah,
exactly. And you can do that hour and a half. You can do an hour sort of story in there, half-hour reset, and then another hour story. And then you could probably have like a simple bar snack area where if you can't eat at that point, you can go there, and then there's a whole nother story going on there. So I think that's.
There's a lot of interesting possibilities there, and I'm actually really excited for it because this is something I was talking about with some friends participating in Ghost Town Alive this summer. You see the kids who are doing this, and this is setting up an expectation for them where they're going to wonder why this level of interactivity doesn't exist in other places. Why, if they go to if they just spent a day at Knott's being a deputy for the sheriff, helping chase down bandits, having this incredible experience that they could go at their own pace, but it was fully tailored to how much or how little they wanted to get involved in it. If they then go back to Disneyland a week later and go into Frontierland, and there's not that same level of interaction, they're going to feel like something is missing. And I think this is sort of charting new ground for immersive entertainment by combining things like theme parks and escape rooms and live theater and sort of mixing it all into one pot and creating this massive interactive experience. And I think it'll be interesting to see how Disney goes about trying to pitch that to people, because you can't treat it like just another hotel, because it's not that. It's a full experience unto itself, separate from the parks.
Almost like they have to sell it like they sell Mission Space in a way. Like, do not ride if all these things. It's like if it's like when you try to book the hotel, this is a 2-day fully immersive experience. You're not going to have a pool. You're not going to have a TV. All that stuff.
Yeah.
And it click this box if you've read and acknowledged the above statement and you're okay with that. P.S. Please talk to your wife and kids first.
Yeah, definitely. It also frightening to see how well it does. Because I'm definitely game for something like that. But for that price point, for that level of immersiveness, is this going to be something that is restricted to the hardcore geeks, or is this going to be something that your average everyday Joe and Jane can get on board with?
And that's what makes it exciting for me is this feels like a risk that I haven't seen Disney take in a long time.
Oh, yeah. It's definitely the most out there thing they've tried in a long time.
this reminds me of Disney of the 90s when they're doing Disney Quest and the ESPN zones and all those kinds of places where they're just trying to throw things at a wall and see what sticks. And this kind of reminds me of that, which is kind of exciting in a way.
Yeah, and it's also building on years of experiments and different things. I mean, I don't think it's any accident that they're... I mean, not that Disney's involved with it directly, doesn't sound like, but the ILMX Labs experience that's coming to Disney Springs and downtown Disney this fall, it's another element of sort of new emergent immersive entertainment that even if Disney was not directly involved in the design of it, they can keep a close eye on it and see how it works and see how many people are game to sign up for it and what the reactions are like to it, and sort of it feels like a test balloon for interest in what the Star Wars Hotel could potentially be.
Yeah, and what's interesting about the sorry, I'm trying to adjust my levels a little bit because I'm going a little hot and you're going a little cold, so I'm going to back away from the microphone a little bit.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. It's something's going on my end, so my apologies. Luckily, I have software that I just drag and drop the file in and just automatically levels all the audio. It's real nice.
Beautiful.
Yes, thank you, technology. Thank you, Levelator. One of the things I think about that, the VR experience is that to me just screams the movie studio produced this, and they paid for everything, and Imagineering and all those people are not involved at all. So,
oh, sure.
I've seen a lot of people use this as some sort of grand thesis statement that VR will never be in the theme parks, and it's like, guys, back away from that. This sounds like a movie. This sounds like a movie promo or those kinds of things.
Yeah, it's definitely that, but I think at the same time, it does. I think it's a way for, again, even if they're not directly involved, I'm sure that Disney's going to be taking notes on this and seeing what the reception to it is, and that could inform how they're going to tackle the Star Wars Hotel going forward. I don't expect there will be a VR element to the Star Wars Hotel necessarily. I think it'll be much more physical than that. But this idea of paying an upcharge for an immersive Star Wars experience that's separate from the parks, I think that'll be something they're going to look at closely.
I think so. I mean, I could see them eventually maybe adding on a VR experience as part of an attraction in the Star Wars Hotel as an addition, but not as a main component. And as you were saying that, I remembered like a week or two ago, there was the really douchey article about how this one cocktail is like a VR cocktail. And it was like some guy wearing like, those Galaxy headsets with like the thing. So I can just imagine this, like, the worst case scenario for the Star Wars Hotel is just everyone wearing VR helmets at dinner. And it's just like a cafeteria, but everyone's looking around and there's people with like feather dusters coming around, like pretending like an alien scraped against you or something. So
right. That's what it's going to be. They're just going to strip out all the theming from one of the All-Stars and just slap a VR headset over your head for 2 days.
Yeah, I heard like they were planning on like one of the options was a Star Wars Hotel was literally just redoing the other half of Pop Century, like just going full blown for it. Yeah. Let's just do a Star Wars Hotel as a hotel. Maybe that's still an option. Maybe
who knows?
Yeah, I don't know. But man,
it'll be like the Marvel Hotel in Paris, where it'll be
giant Darth Vader heads.
Yeah. Star Wars props in the lobby and maybe a Star Wars painting on the wall of your room and not much else.
Yeah, it'll be the All-Stars.
Star Wars bed sheet.
Yeah, pretty much. It'll be like that new Motel 6 kind of vibe that their new rooms have. Yeah. But it's going to have Disney stuff on it instead. And a giant Darth Vader helmet outside and I don't know, lightsaber shaped pool, which would be kind of a lame pool when you think about it. But anyway, that'll be the Olympic pool, the Olympic swimming pool with the lightsaber pool.
Yeah, and then they'll have a BB-8 pool next to it. That's the kid pool.
Yeah, but not two BB-8 pools next to it, because that would look real bad if you place them wrong. So anything else with the role-playing games or Star Wars Hotel or anything like that?
No, I not really. But it is definitely an interesting thing to watch, because you've got Disney and not sort of really aggressively experimenting with it, with stuff like The Optimist and with Legends of Frontierland and now Ghost Town Alive and the stuff Disney's doing for Star Wars. It'll be interesting to see when and if Universal dips their toes into that water. Like, is there somebody at Universal Creative now frantically drawing up a pitch for a Harry Potter hotel? It'll be interesting to see how this develops, because I don't think this is going away. I don't think, contrary to what some people think, I don't believe this is just a fad, because, like I said, you have these kids who are doing experiences like Ghost Town Alive, and I think that's going to be what they come to expect. I think that's going to be as much a part of theme parks to them as the rides or the shows or the food or anything else. This idea of characters who not only exist in carefully choreographed meet and greet spaces, but who roam throughout the space and interact with you and help sell the theme of that area, of that environment.
Mm-hmm. And something just escaped my mind right now. Yes, totally. I agree. I think what I remember what I was going to say was, what's really interesting is that they have not put a date on the Star Wars experience, I'll call it, or the hotel. Yeah, there's no date.
That is interesting.
So I'm thinking this could be like still something that's 5 years, 6 years out.
Yeah, it's possible. The rate Disney builds stuff, especially in Florida, who knows how long it'll take. What it was 6 years between when Pandora was announced and when people were actually allowed to walk into it. But who knows? I don't expect it'll take quite that long. Not Pandora long, but I think they're still very much working out the details and the logistics of what exactly this thing is going to be. Mm-hmm.
It almost seems like they had a really great idea and they kind of proposed, like, this still seems like it's blue sky territory.
Right. It's like they got the green light to go, but they haven't solidified the plans of what exactly it's going to be.
Or done the engineering work necessarily, or done all the planning. Yeah. It seems like they have an idea. Chapek's like, this sounds good. Let's go to the next phase of development, but we'll still announce it because I'm confident in it. That kind of thing. Almost, it reminded me a lot of the Disney Decade, where you have a lot of projects that are in various stages of development that you announce, but not all of them happen.
Yeah.
So, okay.
And that. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Let's move on.
No, I'm sorry. If you have another thing, go for it.
Oh, I was just gonna say, and with the Disney Decade, who knows if it'll ever actually get done? But I hope it does, because I'm excited to see what it ends up being.
Yeah. So next is something actually I've been thinking about for a while. It's something that I want to write an article on, so I'm gonna kind of pass it between David and I and figure something out, or I'll write something. I have like 3 articles I need to write, so so what I've been thinking of is it came up around the time of the changes coming to Muppets. They were doing some funky stuff around that area. They closed the one in California, unfortunately, which I think, outside of the exterior area being worse, I like that version better than the Florida one. Way better audio animatronics.
Yeah, the animatronics were definitely more polished. I think the projection was better.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I miss it.
Yeah, and then in Florida, they changed out the sign to be way more generic, like significantly more generic. And the whole area feels like it could be scrubbed of Muppets in 12 hours if need be.
Yeah.
It's just got that vibe to it. So what I was then I was thinking about this, and I go, well, this Muppet Vision 3D is the last performance of Kermit by Jim Henson.
Yeah.
It's also the last thing he directed, I believe.
The last Muppet project.
Muppet project, yeah. I think he did something else.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he did one more project, but it wasn't Muppet related afterwards.
Yeah,
but yeah,
it was Labyrinth. Maybe was after it. I can't remember the timeline. Labyrinth or Dark Crystal, something like that.
Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, I can look it up. Yeah, everyone go to IMDb. Look that up. But so I was thinking, well, Disney should just release this on DVD or Blu-ray. As like a historical artifact, because, last present, I think it's like has some historical value to it. But then I'm starting to think, well, that doesn't make sense. Because then you're thinking like, first of all, it's in 3D, and not everyone has a 3D TV.
Mm-hmm.
But then it's like, well, what about the audio animatronics? What about the penguins? What about Sailor Wardolph? What about Bean Bunny? What about then you're really thinking, well, what about turning around and seeing, the Swedish Chef with the shotgun peering
absolutely.
Then you're thinking, well, what about Sweetums coming to the theater? Then you're thinking, well, what about the bubbles and the fiber optic fireworks? And then you're thinking, well, what about the pre-show? What about all that stuff around you? And then I started thinking about theme park archival, or theme park, I don't want to say preservation, but I want to say archival.
Yeah.
I think it sounds a lot better. Should theme parks be archived? Should the attractions be archived? How should they be archived? Can they be archived?
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I've thought a lot about this specifically with Muppet Vision, because I love Muppet Visions, and I will fly down there and chain myself to the theater if they announce that it's going.
Us and all of Tough Pigs.
Yeah. But it is very interesting with that one specifically, because, like you mentioned, there's so much to that show beyond just the film element. The film element makes up like maybe 70% of the experience, if we're being generous. I'd argue closer to 60%, because there's just so much that happens all around you during every minute of that film, where, something like Captain EO would be very easy to release on Blu-ray, and it baffles me that they haven't.
They showed it on MTV.
Right. There's got to be some kind of licensing dispute with the Michael Jackson estate or something like that. That's the only reason I can think of for why they wouldn't do that, because it would just make money hand over fist. But that's a show where it really is just the film. There are some in-theater effects, but 90 to 95% of it is just the movie, and that would be very easy to translate to home video. Honey, I Shrunk the Audience, Magic Journeys, even It's Tough to Be a Bug, although that one has more physical stuff in the space. Those could all be translated to home video fairly seamlessly, but Muppet Vision is kind of unique in that it completely surrounds you. Every aspect of it you'd be losing a lot if you just had the film element on Blu-ray.
Yeah.
And even beyond that, going into other attractions, it becomes closer to live theater, where it's almost this thing it's almost this ephemeral thing where you have in most cases a set number of performances, and then it's gone. You can read the script, you can put on your own performance, you can watch recordings of it potentially, but it's that thing as it originally existed will never exist again. It's vanished into the ether. And I think theme park attractions are kind of the same way in that regard. It's there's, short of physically reconstructing them somewhere in like a museum setting, which would be incredibly expensive, let alone licensing issues with Disney. There's not a lot of ways you can really preserve it outside of its original environment. I I think VR actually offers the best possible solution to this problem. And I know I've heard about people who are, I know there are people who are meticulously sort of cataloging Universe of Energy and Great Movie Ride with VR cameras to, try to capture as much of that experience as you can. But it's, goes back to the perpetual theme park Twitter debate of physical sets versus screens. It's just not the same watching a physical space projected onto a flat medium, even if it's a VR headset.
And that was a good point. Is like the VR thing what it does is it does encompass the idea of having being in a place when there are things going around you. Because what I always keep thinking back is to the cowboy and the gangster scene of where there are things going on your left or right, in front of you, and sometimes behind you. Or the alien scene, or things like this where you need to change focus based on audio cues or things happening that a simple jump cut in a Martin's video doesn't really do very well. And I think that would work. Martin's videos is really great at archival. The problem is you just don't get that space. You don't feel it. You don't get that kind of depth perception and the general kind of I'm trying to think, kind of a spatial awareness. That you get.
And it's sort of like as technology progresses, we're getting closer, but every version of archival technology we have when it comes to theme park attractions at this point is one or more steps removed from the actual experience. I mean, you've got VR, which is probably the closest we're ever going to get until somebody invents a literal holodeck. But even that, there's not the physicality of it. Or going back to Great Movie Ride, there's not the same feeling of, oh my God, this actor from the ride, this character that was just in the scene has gotten into my vehicle and is taking me through the next 3 or 4 scenes of the show. And or even more for something like Alien Encounter, where the majority of that show takes place in the dark, and it's just these physical effects that mess with you in the seat. You can't, unless you have like a custom built rig that you programmed yourself. You can't recreate that stuff in any kind of video footage.
So one of the things I wanted to bring up is that there's someone who's recreating Horizons in Unity.
Yeah.
And it's a ride through of Horizons where you start from outside the pavilion, you go into the pavilion, you walk through the queue, and you get in the ride vehicle. And he's been working on this for years and years and years and years, and he's been building this thing for years and years and years. And one of the things he had a few test scenes with a mock-up of the Horizons ride vehicle. So he basically rebuilt this in a 3D experience and then had a larger screen in front of you kind of recreating this 3D model. So you could still look around wherever you wanted to, and it was still high enough quality that it wasn't like the grainy videos you find where they have to cut between various scenes because it's not presented clearly enough.
No, that is a really interesting approach, and I've seen some of his work, and it's really incredible, and I think it's incredibly valuable. One of the questions you asked that I kind of I forgot to address was whether theme park archival work in regards to theme park attractions is valuable, and I think it is very much so. I mean, I think as a student of any artistic or entertainment media, it's valuable to look at the past and see what's gone before. And, we talked about stuff like live theater, which is where it be incredibly difficult to recapture that experience. But even there, you have stuff like the published playbooks and audio recordings and video recordings and, revival showings of certain shows, and you can study the show and get a feel for it, even if you can never recapture 100% of the original experience. And so I think, even if we never get to the point where we can recapture 100% of the experience of a dead theme park attraction, getting 70% of the way there, 60% of the way there, or even 50% of the way there is valuable for understanding the history and legacy of this stuff that's been important, or at least highly popular staples of our culture for decades now.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, so one of the things I was talking about is I was listening to some podcasts, as I always do, as you can tell. And one of the things was brought up is like, what is art? Art is like, there's various definitions of art, with one of them being if it's, commercial, it cannot be artistic. If there's commercial value to it, which I don't necessarily agree with, but
yeah, I absolutely don't agree with that. But I've also one of my favorite sort of jokes I've ever heard is that if you walk into an art school, the only correct definition of art is I don't know, because no matter what definition of it you personally have, somebody's going to yell at you about it,
mm-hmm.
because it's such a almost indefinable idea.
Yeah, So we covered that. So yes, I do also agree that attractions should be archived in some way. Even like Imagineering archives their attractions through video, at least.
Mm-hmm.
Also through the models they keep, the art they keep, the scripts they keep, and also nowadays they do all their cave work. They probably keep a lot of those renderings so you can walk through the attraction, similar to if it still existed.
Right, and even just the oral tradition stuff. Like I like MK Pony Foxy Hose.
Mm-hmm.
Her meticulous cataloging of the basically entire history of the Haunted Mansion is one of my favorite things, because it's I wasn't alive to experience a lot of those changes as they happened. And so going back and sort of being able to read about what it used to be like through the perspective of somebody who has painstakingly studied and cataloged how it's developed over time has been really valuable for me personally. And I think it's valuable for the medium as a whole.
Mm-hmm. I know Long Forgotten does that. They're really good. Yeah, and also Foxy stuff on Passport to Dreams, mm-hmm. for all that stuff. So I guess maybe a good way to put it is that there needs to be multiple ways to look.
Yeah.
Maybe it doesn't need a Criterion collection, but we need the analysis, we need the oral history, we need the physical, like, concept art and actual things, and then maybe we do need the supplemental video, so right. We could piece it all together and see how it flowed better.
Yeah, and at this point, that almost entirely exists within the fan space, and mm-hmm. I think it's incredibly admirable that fans have stepped up to the plate and done this work. But I hope that at some point Disney or Universal or Cedar Fair or somebody else will take a deeper interest in their own history and create spaces where they can, have almost a museum of what the history of these places used to be. Like it was, I know Knott's recently auctioned off a bunch of their old stuff, and it's, I get why they did that, but at the same time, wouldn't it have been really neat if they had created a dedicated museum, even separate from the park, and maybe charged a nominal admission for it as another revenue stream for the company, and have a place to showcase these old audio animatronics from Knott's Berry Tales, or these old ride vehicles, or concept art, or blueprints, or whatever else. And if you have a company on the level of Disney or Universal funding something like this, you could have these elaborate, virtual recreations of certain attractions where, whether it's a VR headset or something more like you were talking about with the Horizons project, where you're in a mock-up of an old ride vehicle, riding through a virtual recreation of something, or even a virtual mock-up of an attraction that never even existed. Because, I know on at least one version of the Little Mermaid DVD, they had a full digital ride-through of one of the original dark ride concepts for the Little Mermaid.
Mm-hmm.
Not the one we eventually got, but a whole
the suspended one.
Yeah. So it's a ride that never existed, that there's a virtual recreation of. And so to have a dedicated space to do stuff like that, I think would be incredibly valuable.
That also reminds me, there's so much work that's been done with the Western River Expedition. You see models, you see concept art, you hear stories, you understand what could have worked, what couldn't have worked, what probably would have definitely been toned down very quickly.
Right.
Man, if that was built, whew!
Forget the "We Want the Redhead" scene. Like, you'd have to shutter almost that whole attraction.
Yeah. Oh boy. But the one thing that put that together for me was seeing the D23 walkthrough with new concept art, the model, and the audio with the Tony Baxter narration saying, "We are now panning right, we're now panning left." And I think Foxy also did some reconstruction work for that and showed how things were laid out.
Yeah, and I think D23 is definitely the closest we have to sort of this idea of a theme park museum, like I was saying, but it's only once every 2 years for a weekend in the middle of the summer, and it'd be cool to have something like that on a more permanent scale.
Mm-hmm. I remember. I don't remember. I think it was for something with Disneyland. I forget exactly what it was, but there was a press conference going on, and they were showing kind of some of the things they were doing. And one of the big things they highlighted was like reliving your old like classics or whatever. And they kind of hinted at like Adventures Through Inner Space and some of the attractions that are long gone. Circle Vision, I think, was another one they talked about. But they never really followed up on that promise of some sort of reliving attractions that from your childhood.
That was part of the whole, wasn't it like the limited time magic thing? They were talking about stuff, and they brought back Golden Horseshoe Review for like a minute and a half, but they showed some of that other stuff you were mentioning, and it never came to fruition.
Yeah, I forget what it was. It may have been limited time magic. I thought maybe it was for the 60th or something, but it was very much that, where they kind of teased it and then they kind of dropped it.
I will say, as much as I'd like to see a museum of some sort, like I was mentioning, the sort of hyper cynical way to do this, which is what I've sort of feared is the route Disney will eventually go, is we were talking about bringing VR into the parks, and I could very easily see Disney specifically having like a $100+ upcharge experience where you can pop on a VR headset and live in your own virtual recreation of the park as it used to exist while you're in the park it is today. So it's just and that gives them permission to go hog wild with whatever they want to do. Mm-hmm. And, it's still there if you want to pay $150 to experience it through a VR headset.
It seems like something they would put in like the Starcade or something, where it's like, come and relive Adventures Through Inner Space, like right here. And they put up the, the old attraction sign or something, and you walk up there and you put the VR helmet on and you're sitting in an Omnimover, and you go the Atomobile, I think it was. And, you see everything around you. And, that was an attraction that closed before I was born. So I'll never be able to experience that. It wasn't like I missed it. I didn't exist yet. So,
yeah. Although I think somebody has pointed out that if you have some solid noise canceling headphones and really good timing, you can go through Spaceship Earth with the Walter Cronkite narration still, because up until the end of the attraction, so little of it has changed that you just swap out the audio and it's as you remember it from your childhood.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Is the for attractions that haven't changed, is you can put on audio and hear the old attractions, but that really only applies to Spaceship Earth.
Yeah, that's kind of the only one.
Yeah, that's really the only one. That's because it's really been updated that much, and
Disneyland Space Mountain maybe you could do that, but there's still some effects that have been changed between the original version and the current version.
Yeah. But yeah, so that's Theme Park Archival, and I'm still debating writing an article on it, but I wanted to definitely get that out there and discuss it, and kind of toss it around. I think it's something that we should cover, especially since the Great Movie Ride is closing on Sunday. The Universe Energy is also closing on Sunday, but most of that is a movie. So, yeah. I mean, you're losing the dinosaur scene, but out of like a 38-minute, attraction, 5 of it is the dinosaurs. It's kind of like, okay.
I should mention real quick, I'm not sure if everybody knows about this, but Universal, speaking of rides that are largely film elements, on, I think it's the Back to the Future 3 Blu-ray.
The 25th anniversary, I think. I have that.
Yeah,
Blu-ray.
Yeah, they have every film element from the attraction, including all the pre-show videos, the queue videos, the ride itself. I've always... you could almost do, with a VR headset, you could almost do what we were talking about with Spaceship Earth if somebody took the ride film and created a VR version of it, because the simulator motion is exactly the same as it used to be. So you just pop on a VR headset and sync up the audio and or sync up the timing, and you've got Back to the Future back.
They didn't change the programming of the ride vehicles?
As far as I know, I think it's the exact same simulator motions. That's what I've been... At least that's what I've been told.
Then, man, they did a really good job of hiding that. Wow. Huh. I've never heard of that before, so that's crazy if true, as they say. All right, David. We've been talking for an hour and a half. I don't want to keep any longer than you need to. Where can we find you online at? So
I write for a couple different places at this point. But the easiest place to find me is at davidmdoubt.com. That's DAUT. There's links to all of my stuff there. You can also find me on Twitter at davidmdoubt.
Cool. You can find me at Parkscope Joe. You can find all of us at Parkscope. If you're still around, hey, give us a review, please. I should probably do that at the beginning. Like, hey, subscribe right at the beginning, because people are just tuned out by now. So I don't know.
Well, I feel if they've stuck around this long, they're probably in the bag for giving you guys a good one.
That's a good point. Or they already have. I don't know. Do another rating. Tell someone else to rate it. Anyway, thank you very much, everyone. We'll be back soon. I don't know when, but yeah, you get the idea. Congaloosh, everyone.
Love everybody, hate everything.